What rights do you have in this situation? How do you take back control in this moment? I'm Jeff Hampton, former prosecutor turned people's lawyer, and I've seen police use some really clever tactics to get what they want at your front door. In this video, I'll cover number 1, can the cops legally just hang out and camp out at your front door and refuse to leave? And then number 2, how you can protect yourself if the cops try to force their foot into your doorway so that you can't shut the door. Stick around to learn how to protect your rights and how to stop cops from using these common police tricks against you. Situation number 1. Is it legal for cops to hang out at your front door and refuse to leave? Cops show up at your front door and they start knocking. Now, when I say knocking, I mean they're banging on the door and they're refusing to leave. That's exactly what happened in the case of U.S. versus Velasco Durazo. Cops had received an anonymous tip that Mr. Velasco's house had been used as a stash house for potential drugs. So the police showed up out there and they started looking around and they began to interview different neighbors, and the only thing they really learned is that it's usually pretty quiet there and they very rarely see anybody at the house. Police then decided to perform a knock and talk, one of the most common techniques used by law enforcement. And essentially, a knock and talk is when the officers come to your front door, knock on the door, hope that you're willing to answer the door so that they can gather enough information either from what you say or your behavior to justify either a search, a detention, or an arrest. Now, while the primary officers were banging on the front door at the house, the other officers went around to the back of the house and they claimed that they smelled detergent and other cleaning chemicals. It's important to understand the officers at the front door were banging on that door very hard for more than 2.5 minutes, making it crystal clear to the occupants inside they had no intention of leaving. Eventually, Mr. Velasco opened the door, but he still had a metal screen door between him and the police, so he talked to them for a while through that screen door. But the officer continued to be persuasive and tried to convince him to either let him inside the house or to come outside and talk with him. This is where Mr. Velasco made a huge mistake. He decided to step outside. He didn't want the officers inside, but he stepped outside to have a conversation with the cops. That's when he realized he had made a huge mistake, and so he tried to turn around and open the screen door and walk back inside. But any guesses what the cops did when he turned around to walk back inside? They just followed right with him, claiming they had implied consent to walk in and do a protective sweep. In other words, the cops just followed him right in, gained access to the house, and started snooping around looking for anything they could find. Of course, as they rummaged through his things, they found a firearm and some marijuana. Police then used this as a basis to hold Velasco until they had a complete search warrant that allowed them to search the entire house, which then they arrested Mr. Velasco for contraband. Now, here's the important point to look at. The cops would have never made it inside that house without performing a knock and talk, because remember, they did not have a warrant when they approached that front door. The Fourth Amendment protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures. So generally speaking, the police cannot just enter into your home and search or do anything else unless they either have a valid search warrant, your consent, or some type of emergency situation that qualifies as exigent circumstances. With knock and talks, we've covered on previous videos that the police have what's known as an implied license to walk up to your front door, knock on the door, and see if you'll open the door. But this is no more of a right than your DoorDash delivery driver or an Amazon driver might have coming to your front door. So the police are still required to comply with what the court calls social norms. In other words, the courts have all made this really clear here that the police have no special protections when they come up to your front door. No extra rights here than anyone else. And that's because they are on what's known as the curtilage of your property. So the curtilage is the area immediately surrounding your home, your front porch, your back porch, the area around your windows. And the courts have ruled that this curtilage is just as protected as the inside of your home. In fact, in Davis versus United States, the court argued there that an actual knock and talk is technically a consensual encounter between you and the police. Okay, so cops can legally perform knock and talks. But this is really important. In United States versus Cormier, they put some limitations on it. Quote, the court held that an innocent knock and talk becomes a Fourth Amendment violation if the cops use their badge of authority to try to force you to open your door and talk to them, or if the police were unreasonably persistent in attempting to gain entry. The court then went on to say that if the cops try this tactic here at nighttime, it's even more likely that it's going to be a Fourth Amendment violation. In Velasco's case, this happened at nighttime. It was around 9 p.m., and they made it very clear, the cops made it clear they weren't going anywhere, so there was a Fourth Amendment violation in his case. But what about the anonymous tips the cops received and those police conversations they had with the neighbors? Isn't that enough evidence for the police to justify what they did? First of all, the cases you see on the screen right now have established that in order for police officers to use an anonymous tip to establish reasonable suspicion of a crime, they have to actually corroborate that tip with some independent evidence. Without this corroboration, the tipster is not reliable. It's not like we can haul an anonymous tipster up to the witness stand and cross-examine him and find out what he really saw. In Velasco's case, there was nowhere near enough corroborating evidence to establish that his house was being used as a stash house. And finally, cops claimed they showed up and investigated. But what did they actually do? They showed up at the house. They saw a house with a front door. They saw windows that they spent a lot of time talking about had, blinds, and they had some type of, curtains covering the windows. But who doesn't? That is something each and every one of us does because we want privacy in our home. That on its own does not establish any type of reasonable suspicion of a crime. Oh, and the lack of cars in the driveway and it being very quiet at the home, this doesn't establish any reasonable suspicion of a crime. In fact, it might prove exactly the opposite. Finally, the last-ditch effort of the police is that they claimed that the smell of cleaning chemicals at the back of the house may have indicated that the occupants of the house were hiding the smell of drugs. The problem? The cops in the backyard who claimed they smelled the cleaning chemicals never told the officers banging on the front door. And they didn't even know about this until after they had already entered into the home, searched the entire home, and arrested Mr. Velasco. Now, if the cops in the backyard had shared that information about how they smelled cleaning chemicals with the officers at the front door, banging on the door, and if you had told them that at the same time, under the collective knowledge rule, they could have used that information as potentially an argument here, but they never did. So as a result of it, that argument fell flat. So what does this mean for you? Always check your state and circuit court decisions, but we have a little bit of a blueprint here of how to protect yourself if you find yourself in a situation like Mr. Velasco. Number one, if cops come to your front door and they refuse to leave and they're banging on your door, or maybe they're using their badge as a way to try to force you to come out of your house, and especially if this is happening at night, this is likely a seizure under the Fourth Amendment. Cops just cannot claim that it is a consensual encounter for them to come camp out at your front door, bang on your door. There's no consent involved in that at all. Your neighbor doing this, or your DoorDash driver doing this, would be arrested for criminal trespass if they tried to pull this. And remember, the cops don't have any more rights at your front door than either one of those people. So it's important to understand here, they must comply with social norms, and to behave this way is a Fourth Amendment violation. Number two, don't open the door. If you do, you could end up being victimized like Mr. Velasco here, because the cops could try to pull this trick where they then just follow you into your home and now conduct a protective sweep, which means they're snooping on everything inside of your house and your privacy rights have been violated. Number three, always have an outdoor front porch camera, very clearly showing what's going on at the front door, and a back porch camera also showing what's going on in your backyard, so that if the cops camp out and they refuse to leave, or they act improper by using their badge as an authority here, you can prove that your rights have been violated regardless of whatever they put in their police report. Finally, if cops violate your Fourth Amendment rights in this situation and you end up being arrested, you can file a motion to suppress to have any and all evidence that was seized thrown out in court because it was an illegal search. Now, situation number two. How do you protect yourself and stop cops if they try to force their foot into your door? You're a law-abiding citizen, and you've always been told since the time you were young to trust the police. So cops come to your front door, you open the door, and just when things start feeling a little uncomfortable, you're shocked to see an officer force his foot into the threshold of your door, and now you can't shut the door. Can you close the door on the officer's foot? Now, before I answer this question, be prepared for another police trick before we get there. The officer is likely going to try to get you to do what Mr. Velasco did here, trying to get you to come outside and talk to the officer because you lose control if you step outside the house. They're going to claim, hey, listen, if you'll just step outside for a minute, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions and we'll be on our way. Do not fall for this trick. The safety of your castle is the most protected place under the Fourth Amendment. The moment you step outside, you open yourself up to all types of police tactics that now they can continue to question you, maybe start examining not only what you say, but your so-called behavior. And that might claim now, they may claim they have enough information to establish some type of probable cause to either search you, detain you, or maybe even arrest you. So unless you want to lose control over the situation, do not step outside. And if you really just persist on opening the front door for the police, then make sure if you've got a screen door like Mr. Velasco did, make sure you keep that barrier between you and the police so that way you have this firewall of protection so that they can't force their way into your home. But what if you realized you made a mistake? And in the process of going to close that door, the officer's foot is right there, and now you're faced with a very serious situation. Legally, you could argue that you are allowed to shut the door on this police officer's foot, because he is now entering into your home without a warrant, without your consent, and arguably he is trespassing. The problem? This is a very common trick used by the police because they know exactly how this works. You are now in a very difficult situation. Do you stand up for your rights and force the door closed, even if it were to hit that officer's foot? Or do you face the practical reality that most officers will use your attempt at shutting that door as a basis to claim their foot was now injured or hurt, and now they will use that to justify a takedown and possible arrest for assault and battery of a public servant, a felony crime? In Commonwealth versus Barnes, a state-level case, that's what happened to Mr. Barnes. Mr. Barnes was actually trying to get away from officers illegally arresting him. It was clearly an illegal arrest. And in the process of doing so, he fled back into his home. The officers came right behind him. He shut the door and hit the foot of that officer and then resisted arrest. Interestingly enough, the court ruled that Mr. Barnes was allowed to use reasonable force to resist an unlawful arrest. Interestingly, the court said specifically that Mr. Barnes closing the door on the officer's foot was reasonable force, but they only ruled that way because they also ruled that the arrest itself was illegal. Strangely enough, though, the same court that said this was reasonable force then told Mr. Barnes that he should have, quote, simply obeyed the officers and went peacefully with their request, even though he had a legal right to use reasonable force to stop the police from making an unlawful arrest. Interesting. But before you decide to shut the door on an officer's foot in the future, watch out for Carter versus Commonwealth. In this case, Ms. Carter was attempting to lawfully remove trespassing police officers from her property. Her method of doing this was to shut the front door on the officer's foot. Here, though, the court ruled that Ms. Carter's attempts to repel the police in this situation actually gave the cops the justification they needed in order to actually detain her. Here's the key difference, though. In this case, they said that the actual detention and arrest for Ms. Carter was lawful, not unlawful like we saw earlier, that it was lawful. So as a result of that, they allowed the district attorney to both charge and convict her of assault and battery of a public servant. So how do you stop cops from sticking their foot in your door? The safest and legal way to do this would be to consider these options. Number one, use two different types of camera action here in order to protect yourself. First thing I would do is I would pull out my phone and I would record everything that's going on. And you want to have your outside camera focused on that front door, recording everything that's taking place so that you can protect yourself and document what is happening. I say to use both ways to record here because many police agencies actually have a policy that if they come to your front door, they will cover or disable your porch camera in order so that you cannot see what they are doing. So use both. Number two, immediately tell the officer you do not consent to a search and you do not consent to him entering into your home, and to do so would be trespassing. Number three, I would then exercise my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and I would stay silent. Do not answer their questions. By following these rules and not taking it to a physical level, you are ensuring that your actual constitutional rights have been activated for protection. But then on top of that, by recording everything, you now have everything on video to make sure the police are held accountable. Plus, if the officer claimed he had separate probable cause to enter into your home because of an exigent circumstance, you recording everything on both of those devices will provide secondary evidence here that, regardless of what that officer put into his report, could show that this was definitely an illegal search. Remember, the officer always has the burden to prove he had a legal reason to enter into your home, not you. Documenting everything and standing up for your rights will give you the best chance to show that your rights were violated. Even better than all of this, just don't answer the door. You literally could ignore the fact that the officer is at your front door, and now you avoid having to deal with these police tricks and the possibility they may try to use this to violate your rights. If you have a home security camera trained on your front door, you can see that it's a police officer, and you can just kick back in your easy chair and ignore the whole situation. Now the police don't even know if you're home or not, so you're not putting yourself in a situation where a police trick could jeopardize your future. Remember, as a general rule, if the police are at your front door and you didn't call them or you don't have any business with them, you are legally required to ignore that they are there. But wait a minute, what if the cops claim to have a warrant? Now, in that situation, if the cops come to your door demanding you open because they have a warrant, there's a good chance they're going to be able to justify coming in whether you like it or not. In fact, most police officers will claim that they had reason to believe that the suspect was in the home, and they'll use that as a justification to force their way into your house. If cops claim they have a search warrant, ask to see it. They can either slide it under the door or you can ask for a copy to review. Tell them you do not consent to any search that is not expressly provided for within that search warrant affidavit. Then you step aside, you exercise your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and if you have to open your mouth for anything else, it's to call your lawyer to make sure you can exercise your Sixth Amendment right to counsel. Now, what if cops come to your front door, but this time they cover or they disable your security cameras? Is that even legal? Check out this next video where I break down how to stop cops and protect your rights if they come to cover your cameras. See you over there.